Well, you are listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast extension of the nonprofit that educates and engages individuals on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia, and on this episode, we are revving up our chainsaws because we're talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, not the 1974 version, because, that was called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Much like, Fast and Furious decided that they could just rebrand themselves by taking out the word the. But, here we are. We'll talk about it in just a little bit. I'm joined by Andy Marva, one of the co-hosts of the Love What I Love podcast. What's going on, man?
Hey, Josh. So happy to be here. Happy to be back. Always grateful when I get that text from you to come on the show and talk horror.
You're like my go-to horror guy now, outside of Mark. If I'm just like, I need someone in a pinch. Hey, man, what are you doing?
Yeah, I love it. Also,
I guess it's some.
Real quick, I didn't realize that the name The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was different. I didn't realize they dropped the. I thought they were just going straight up, same title, Halloween Scream style. So I appreciate they left it slightly different. Because I was like, now we got to call this Massacre 22. It's so hard to talk about these movies.
Yeah, I've kind of just shortened the name down to TCM 22. So
it's pretty good.
But I like Scream. I feel like is the only one that can have the wear that badge of why it ends up calling itself the same thing after it's foundational, because they actually use it as a source of commentary and explain the reason why they called it that. Whereas I feel like just these other ones is just the latest weird trend that horror movies are doing when it comes to mainstream.
Yeah, I think it's an extension, but in the 80s, we numbered our sequels for a while, and then studios realized we got to stop numbering them because nobody wants to see a part 7. They get worried. So they changed it to Halloween H2O or Halloween The Curse of Michael Myers. So now we're just everyone's yo, we can't even remind them that this is not new. So let's just call it the original name. I agree with you on the Scream thing. I think it is the most justified, but I still am going to call it Scream 5. And I don't know. It's just easier. It's Scream 5.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine, because it's if you just be oh yeah, well it's Scream 5, and they're oh, you mean Scream 22? It's no.
Yeah, it's just fun. All right.
Yeah, because I mean, Scream is an interesting one, because you get into not only is there a 1996 thing, there's also an MTV and VH1 series also named Scream, from 2 different eras, and then you have the 22. So there's technically 4 Screams in the Scream franchise.
Yeah, it's up there with Halloween and most same named thing. It's ridiculous.
I think it's interesting that you bring up the 80s and the 90s trend of how we started numbering sequels, and then we got away from them, and it was kind of a tagline that we would put.
Yeah.
But yet we still flock to the theaters, streaming services, and watch this is the 9th entry into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise.
Yeah.
And yet my entire Facebook yesterday was nothing but this movie. It was great.
Mm-hmm. No, agreed. I did actually pause it and count on my fingers. I'm like, what number are we up to here? And I was like, Jesus, 9. All right, let's do it. But yeah, people are still flocking, whether or not it goes to show, I mean, maybe it is working to just have the title be the original. And instead of, especially this franchise has been quote unquote rebooted or retooled, and the origin has been redone at least 4 or 5 times, if I had to guess.
Well, let's go ahead and let's actually run down these timelines real quick. Right, so you have the original timeline that consists of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Texas Chainsaw 2, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw 3, and then Texas Chainsaw, the next generation. Yeah. And then you have the reboot timeline, which is Texas Chainsaw 03, and then you have Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the beginning, and then you have the Leatherface timeline, which is 2017's Leatherface, and then you also have Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then from 1974, and then you have the 1974 timeline that kicks off the 3D timeline as well, because this is not the first time Texas Chainsaw has done a requel. In fact, 2013 for his goofy as it was in parts, it was actually ahead of its time.
I like that one. I'm a little bummed that we never got a follow up because I feel like, there's no spoilers on that one, but the flip of having the protagonist then kind of jump on Leatherface's side is insane. And none of these horror slashers that ever set up an ending like that follow through with a sequel. I'd love a sidekick or something. That'd be insane.
I wanted that so bad, and we talked about this when me and you did all of the Halloween last year for
Yeah.
Love What I Love, and I am unashamedly like just a passionate Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 fanboy. It is one of my favorite films of all time, not only in the franchise but just films period.
Yep.
And like they set that film up to do a part 3, and the thanks to the man, what's that book that we both read that it's like the
Taking
unmade
Shape.
sequels.
Taking
Taking
Shape
Shape 2
is the unmade sequels.
is the unmade sequel, so it's like the history of like what the sequels could have been, and they tried multiple times to get like a third chapter in the zombie trilogy to make it a trilogy.
Yep.
And it bummed me out because like the comics have explored the idea of Laurie being the Shape,
Mm-hmm.
and I would have personally loved to see the bloodline of Leatherface kind of continue on with someone else entirely. I don't feel like we can get into that later. But yeah, I think that would have been an awesome idea.
Yeah. It would have been awesome. It was right down, not to keep it on Halloween, but down to the Halloween 4, like that everyone thought would lead to a little girl killer alongside Michael or something. But regardless, we're here to talk about TCM 22, as you have dubbed it.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get into this. I've already shared my spoiler thoughts. I will reiterate them here. But Andy, you being the guest, what are your thoughts on this one?
We're keeping it general spoiler free right now.
Yeah, we'll do spoiler free, and then we'll jump into spoilers in a few minutes.
General thoughts. Highly entertained and pleased by what this was. I'm not a big Texas Chainsaw head. I'm not talking about the original. The original, I think, is one of the best horror movies of all time. I actually don't even watch it that much because it unsettles me like other horror movies don't, where it's like it's not even that fun for me to watch. So I dabble with Texas Chainsaw Massacre once every 5 years or so. And then when it comes to the sequels, I actually haven't even seen them all. I've seen the second one for sure. That one's hilarious. I saw the first remake and I saw Texas 3D. So I'm like, I weirdly have blind spots in this franchise. And when it came to this one, you inviting me on is actually what caused me to watch it the day it dropped. I kind of was not paying attention to it. I haven't seen any trailers, didn't know anything about it. So as soon as I popped it on, I saw it was starring the girl from 8th grade. I was like, that's insane. You don't normally get that in a ninth movie in a slasher, as an actor who's, been in some award-winning stuff. And overall, I really liked the idea. I had no idea it was done by fede-alvraez's production kind of company. So it had the vibes of Don't Breathe and the 2013 Evil Dead remake, which I liked both of those. So overall, it's a little hokey at times, but I'm on board, and it might be one of my better sequels that I've seen of Texas Chainsaw.
I had a lot of crap for saying this. I think that, in my opinion, I have a love-hate relationship with 2. I don't. I love, like, I'm entertained by it. I have the poster on my wall thanks to a Christmas gift last year from Alan Graham, one of our podcasters and writers here, also the co-host of You Have to Watch This podcast. So, like, I think that that's the strongest of the sequels that we have gotten, outside of the insanity that is The Next Generation.
I never saw that one. I've seen the clips. I've seen the Matthew McConaughey puts a gun in his mouth clips and stuff out of context. I just never sat down and watched that one.
That one in particular is a absolute fever dream, and I'm partial to that one over 2. I will say that by a slight margin, just because I grew up with that one more. Whereas 2 I didn't see till I was like early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
But this one I think is like, I think you absolutely just said it. Like, this, to me, in my opinion, is the strongest sequel that we've gotten in probably since 1986. And I say that because, like, this delivers on the massacre name, but also is just it's fun, it's fast paced, it's everything you want in a slasher film. And on top of that, I think that this is a film that is made for the fans. I think that if you're coming to this expecting, because this is a lot of criticism that I've seen, people not liking it, is because you're coming to this expecting something along the lines of Malignant or Hereditary, and I just don't feel like this is the film you come. Like, this is just a group of guys that really were loved the original film, came along, and it's got its problems, but it's a blast from
Yeah,
start to finish.
real quick, if you don't mind me asking, because I haven't read any of the criticisms. This is on Netflix. I just finished watching it before we got on here, so I'm hot off the presses. I haven't even read why. I was shocked actually. Right before we hopped on, I checked Rotten Tomatoes and saw 30%, and I was like, really? Like, I know slasher movies aren't generally high regarded, but like, were people expecting something kind of quote unquote highbrow like Hereditary or something like that? Because I don't understand why we're on number 9 of a franchise where Matthew McConaughey has sucked the barrel of a gun and danced around. Like we've gone into silly territory so much with Leatherface that I know what I'm expecting when I go into this, and I think it delivered. And it's not mind-blowing writing, but I think it subverted a lot of slasher expectations, even down to like the main cast and why they were there. So that I was into it. It kind of zigzagged a little bit. It was, I think, I don't know the director personally of like his work, but the Bad Hombre movies, like, they understand kind of like gore and slashers. It just kind of like, what makes them simply good down to their core. Like, this had like 4 or 5 moments where I literally, I don't know, when I get a real crazy gory moment, I tend to like laugh, like not like in a jolly way, but more like in like a nervous way. And this had like 3 or 4 kills or moments where I was just like, oh my God, like, and that's all I asked for. I'm not here for the next Ari Aster, think piece.
Yeah, and so this is the director's actually like this is his second film.
Okay.
He, I'm probably gonna butcher this because I suck at Spanish. I think his first film was called T'Challa. Um,
Okay.
but he wrote and directed that one, so this is his follow up. And yeah, I don't know, man. Like the criticisms is like it seems to be like really polarizing. Like people that really like gore and like the franchise seem to really love this movie, and then people that kind of are casual horror fans seem to just kind of think that this is like hot trash. And like it's not like it's nothing deep. Like there are definitely
Definitely not.
problematic elements throughout the course of this film. Like, yes, it definitely falls into to slasher tropes, but I feel like what makes this movie so entertaining is the fact that like you're getting to kind of see a return to form for Leatherface. I feel like we haven't had a legitimately good Leatherface since '03. And that's almost 20 years ago. So here we are ready for something new that's going to be fun. But also at the same time, I feel like I think the setting for this is also really good because like you, I went back and rewatched the original film, and what makes that film, I agree. I think it is one of the most unsettling horror films that like I see. I don't rewatch it that often. I think I've watched it 3 times in the last 2 years. Um,
Yeah.
but there's just, that film is incredibly atmospheric, and I think they also captured that in the 2003 version where it's like you're just nervously unsettled because of just how rough the cinematography is, how much that type of filmmaking envelops you into its narrative to where like you just like, man, like I really need something funny after watching this, or I
Yeah.
need something a little bit lighthearted because it does bring you to the gnarly side of humanity to where it's like, man, like there are people out here that like really do this and like really train up their kids to do this.
Yeah. And what I think I like about this one, and I don't know if a lot of the other sequels have done it, that hit what the first one did, was by putting a lot of it in daylight, it really changes just like the atmosphere that you'd normally expect out of a horror movie, where normally we wait until nighttime, we wait until we're in small places or shadows. And a lot of these movies, not that there's no night at all, but a lot of the scares and a lot of the stuff just happens in the bright, hot Texas sun in the middle of the day where you would normally feel safe. And this new one kind of did that a lot too, where I just feel like I really enjoyed, it makes it different. It makes it stand out. With all this praise I'm giving it, though, I do have a decent amount of criticisms. Like, I don't think this is like a perfect movie by any means. I'm just waiting until we can kind of spoil it a little bit more. But my general thoughts still are that I like it a lot more than I don't like it, but I do have some problems with it for sure.
Let's jump into this because I feel like we've talked about this. We're getting into an era of horror where it seems to be, as Scream has dubbed it, it's the requel era. You're not
Mm-hmm.
quite a reboot, you're not quite a sequel. You're basically looking at the source material and you're ignoring all the other sequels and creating a new timeline.
Yep.
In the early 2000s, it was the reboot craze, and now it's the requel craze. So you're still giving someone something familiar, but also something new at the same time. And so much of these requels are bringing back legacy characters, and I gotta say that of every legacy sequel we have gotten thus far, this one might be, I don't want to say the worst, but it might actually makes the worst use of its legacy characters.
Dude, we're on the same page a lot. This is like people are gonna think we like talk about this ahead of time and plan it, because that was all my notes where this was the rare example where I actually really liked the storyline of the new kids, or kids, they're not even kids, but the new cast and the actors portraying them. And then I thought everything with Sally was a waste of time. It was I just kept writing in my notes Laurie Strode light. And it had barely any connection to the original cast. It just felt like a different movie every time we went to her, where they were just playing up all these tropes of kind of badassness and just like, look how cool I am because I have a gun and a white tank top and flowing long flowing blonde hair, just like Jamie Lee Curtis did 4 years ago. So I thought it was just kind of like unnecessary, and the fact that it's not even the same actress, so it didn't even have that same feeling of a legacy character that you would normally get. If you recast Laurie Strode or Nev Campbell, it's not, or Sydney, it's not going to feel the same. So I just knew I wasn't looking at Sally anyway. So I feel like this could have been a better movie without that.
Yeah, and I mean we're also at least with some point within this year, we're getting another legacy sequel with The Evil Dead, and The Evil Dead is, of course, bringing back Bruce Campbell for that one, and you know, like you had said, like Scream had its legacy cast. You not only brought in Nev Campbell, Courtney Cox, and David Arquette, but you also brought back callbacks to the Meeks family from Part 3. Um, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, out of every iconic horror franchise, you cannot, under any circumstances, do a legacy sequel. Like, you can pay homage, and I think their heart was in the right place, but again, like Gunnar and Marilyn Burns are both dead. Like
Yeah.
they've gone, and I feel like I feel like I will talk about Leatherface in just a little bit, but I feel like, yeah, I totally agree with everything you're saying. Like, it was the most problematic because it felt so incredibly forced. Where it's like, I might not like be vibing necessarily with this core cast of like millennials that are trying to like bring new life to this like small town, and this might not be like the most ingenious narrative, but I'm okay with it. Like, I am completely okay with it's them, and Leatherface is essentially trying to get revenge because he views them as their mom's murderers. Like, I'm 100% on board for that. What I wasn't on board for was the forced plot line and the interjection of the Sally Hartney character.
Yeah. I fully agree. With the in regards to the new cast and their storyline, uh I didn't vibe with them either, but I don't think you were supposed to, because normally if you're watching Friday the 13th, it's a group of kind of just partying kids. they're all kind of assholes and annoying, and then you're like, I don't like these guys, let's watch them die. So I like this kind of just put a modern 2022 spin on an unlikable group, and it's kind of like these like entitled rich kind of like gentrifying type people who are rolling into this town, and then the regular town folks are just not having it. Again, not brilliant at all and definitely not subtle, but it's something a little different. With slashers, I have much different criteria than if I'm judging a more complicated movie, and I just like to not be fed the exact same thing. And I thought this movie, like I said, is zig sometimes when you expect it to zag, and it's all I really expected. And the kills, if you want to talk about those, are some of them are pretty awesome, including the very first one, if you remember, with the sheriff, when his wrist gets broken and then he uses the bone of the wrist to repeatedly stab him. That's the one where like Masha was still sleeping because I woke up early to watch this. She was still awake, but she was like on her phone in the room, and she came out and she was like, what was so like insane that you made that reaction? And I was like, you don't even want to know, I can't tell you. But yeah, I think they made it crazy.
Yeah, it's even like the chain of events surrounding that one, because like that death is brutal. And like, I mean, this movie's already fast paced, but that sequence in and of itself like just moves so incredibly fast, where it's like you have the cause and effect of mom dies, you have the bone break, stabbed to death, and then you have the gunshot that instantly kills the sheriff too. I was just like, dang.
Yeah.
All right. And then of course you have the hipster chick that goes with him.
Oh yeah. Her even that was the one that dies in the front seat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even that, like, again, I kind of expected, they kept her alive long enough where I'm like, all right, she's gonna escape, join the crew, and like, I agree with you. This movie is very fast paced. I also want to just applaud the filmmakers for 1 second. When we have an episode coming out this Monday where I take a side note out of nowhere and get pretty impassioned on how I feel most modern movies are way too long these days when they don't really need to be. And it's just something I've been thinking about a lot. I think I liked Scream. We liked Halloween Kills. We talked about them. I think they're both good. I also think they're both too long. I think every superhero movie is too long. I think we all need to chill out with these 2 hour and 20 minutes. Like Cruella is 2 hours and 20 minutes long. Like, this is insane. It's a 101 Dalmatians movie. So when I turned this movie on and saw the glorious number of 83 minutes, because that's a slasher. Slashers are 83 to 90. You keep it right in that sweet spot. I applauded it, and I said, thank you for not making this over 2 hours for no reason.
Well, not even that. It's 75 minutes, because then you have like 8 to 10 minutes of credits, and then you have that sweet homage for a possible sequel. Who knows?
Depending on how it does, we'll see.
Yeah, but it's also Netflix, so I'm kind of expecting a sequel, if I'm being honest, just because it's Netflix.
Yeah,
and they've greenlit dumber things for like more seasons or sequels, and I'm just like, how many times do I need to?
I mean, if we're gonna get the Kissing Booth too, I think we should be able to get Texas Chainsaw-Massacre too.
That's what I'm saying, man. I'm just like, we can kind of, just do what David Gordon Green did, and we're just like, oh, we're gonna do a trilogy of these movies. Like, just give me one more, and I'll be okay with this. No, I totally agree. I think the pacing of this movie is immaculate. The fact that like the setup's pretty simple. Group of kids come to a small town. I think I really loved what you said earlier, like having a different criteria for slashers, because essentially, for as much as like I analyzed this movie, like I think the fact that there's only really one person that's actually a developed full-fledged character in Elsie Fisher,
yeah,
is kind of daunting. But again, you're here for Leatherface. I mean, more. Let's be honest.
Yeah. No, you are. But if we can talk about Elsie Fisher for a minute, because I actually kind of like what they did with their storyline, and it kind of fits in with these other Bad Hombre style movies where, Evil Dead remake was kind of about getting over drug addiction and monsters, and then kind of the Don't Breathe movies have a little bit of PTSD and kind of like post-war stuff. And so this is like an active school shooter thing. So I kind of like them bringing in these real world traumatic events and then putting that up against the trauma of a slasher. And so like, yeah, I've already repeated myself 3 times by saying it's not mind-blowing writing. Like it's not, I didn't go like, holy crap, I never thought about that. But I like the angle they went with it. Of kind of just having her have that trauma. And I think Elsie Fisher is just a really good actress. I love 8th Grade. I think that was a great movie. I just haven't seen her since then, so I like kind of forgot about her. And I was like, oh my God, look at her.
I don't think she's actually done a movie since 8th Grade. I could be completely wrong, but I don't think so.
I didn't look up the credits. I was kind of hoping
Yeah.
at the end of the movie it was going to say directed by Bo Burnham. This was going to be like the secret sequel, like 12th Grade. You know, it's like this is just an episode of the same character.
It's like ha ha ha. No, I think you're right. And from a mental health perspective, I think both of the Lila character, and for as much as I have problems, I do think that they do a good job handling the mental health of Sally, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But focusing on Elsie Fisher, I think her story is really woven together really well. And there are like very subtle like hints that they do before you kind of get that like reveal of like, yeah, I was a mass shooting survivor. And we just talked about, we just had a group of documentarians that did life after a mass shooting and what that looks like for people kind of like dealing with the trauma and stuff along those lines. Highly recommend that episode. I'll leave it in the show notes below. But it's called Surviving Pulse: Life After a Mass Shooting. And one of the things that I learned from them is that, you know, it's weird because it's like everything, like you're kind of have like 15 minutes of fame, and then life just like the media circuits kind of dissipates, but you're left with these wounds.
Yeah.
And I think that even the subtlety of like her flipping through like Instagram and like seeing like, hey, this is like a recent thing for her.
Mm-hmm.
That we're still seeing a feed of like, you know, remembering you or like ban guns and stuff along those lines. And then kind of having her talk to, is it Richter? Is that his name?
It might be. I didn't write it down, but I know you're the mechanic guy who's the local.
The mechanic guy, yeah. And like having them kind of bond and talk about it, I thought was just such a fascinating thing. And then kind of seeing her rise up to kind of confront the source of Sally's trauma at the end of this was also just such a fascinating thing. And like, I think it does speak volumes to some current generations that have endured such trauma and such traumatic events that like it almost feels encouraging that like there is hope on the other side. It's a long journey and it's going to be horrific to have to revisit some of these, because like we do see sequences with her like looking at her sister, like someone else, like one of like the investors on the bus, and kind of having these flashbacks of like seeing friends like in school like bleeding out. And I think sometimes you need to, you know, it sounds really cliche to say, but you have to confront the ghosts of the past in order to be able to move away from them.
Yeah, I think I think you nailed it on the head. And Sally, I was wondering if they were going to be able to tie her story into theirs at all. And I did actually like at the very end that Sally was almost kind of like a ghost of what she could become. So she's looking at Sally and being like, and Sally, you know, says that line of like, you have to, if you run away now, he's going to haunt you forever. And that wasn't just about Leatherface. That was like all her demons. And so I kind of like that kind of tying thing where she was just like, look, you could be like me and just like never let this go, or you can go right now and fight, which I thought was real interesting.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
And
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, to your other point, when she's having that moment with Richter because we don't know his name. I really like that quick line of dialogue where she just says something along the lines of, everyone expects me to go do something special now because she was a survivor of something horrible when all her friends died, and she like that brought in a level that haven't really thought about much, as having never experienced anything close to this. Where you think about the horrors of the PTSD, of the being afraid of violence, of something like that happening again, but that other kind of survivor's guilt almost, where she says like, my friends were special. Like she immediately, I assume as soon as her friends died, she started thinking of all the talented things that they could do and things that they could have done and their potential. And then you start feeling like, well, why did I get picked? If if she doesn't necessarily have a thing she's passionate about right now, that's also like kind of like weighing on her brain. So yeah, that's what I meant by I think that they did a decent job at tackling this kind of stuff when I wasn't expecting it when I turned on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 9.
Yeah, I was not expecting any kind of depth at all, and I feel like the depth that we do get is very minimal. But to your point, I have lost friends. I actually lost a friend to suicide, and it's part of the reason why I got into doing mental health advocacy was because it is something that it's just like that survivor's guilt. Like, I mean, it's just such a heavy weight and such a heavy burden to like cope with and have to process. And, I recently, one of our writers lost someone close to him, and he's like, asked me, he's like, how do you handle doing something along these lines? And I'm like, it's been almost 12 years at this point, and like there's still portions of my everyday life that like I still think about him and like what he could have been or like what he could have done, and it's a heavy thought to think about, that like a parent is never going to see their child again, or a coworker is never going to get to see a coworker again, or their significant other is never going to be able to see them again. How do we cope with life after something this horrendous? And I think that that interaction between Sally and Lila is such a beautiful like send off of kind of like almost the final girl, because spoiler alert, Lila is the final girl. Yep. In this, but Sally's also really interesting because here you have like we've seen like Laurie Strode, and we've also at this point also seen Sidney Prescott come back and have to face like these traumatic events from their own past. And Laurie, we've seen two different variants of it, where she was an alcoholic in Halloween H2O, but then she was just like a gun-toting badass in 2018, and
still an alcoholic, but a different type of alcoholic. I feel like she was
just a little bit.
But yeah, go on.
But I what I was gonna say is like when you get Sally, that interaction between Sally and Leatherface for the first time, like she's kind of like she's been like training for this, and the film even opens up and says that she became a ranger and has been hunting for him for 30 or 40 years. And she's just kind of taken back by Leatherface the first time she sees him. And, because at this point she's just driven on rage, and driving on rage and is like still kind of like still an unhealthy mental health habit, because you're not actually working through the trauma, you're holding on to it and the specific feeling you felt in that moment.
Yeah, and the fact that she kind of freezes up in a moment where she probably just could have killed him kind of proves that point, that like she hasn't been working through this health, she hasn't even been thinking about it. And the fact that when she's finally confronted face to face, she kind of freezes up and doesn't do anything. So yeah, it's you're right, it's the same. It's that way that she thought she's been dealing with it for 40 years by like training, but she hasn't really been. But and while I kind of like all that, that's also what I just felt was just kind of a little derivative of Laurie Strode and the stuff we just saw not too many years ago in Halloween. I'm thinking of the scene in 2018 when Michael's getting released and Laurie's parked outside with a gun and she's shaking and crying, and like she thinks she's like been prepared her whole life, and even just the idea of him getting moved to another facility like breaks her down. And I just thought that was a little bit more effective than what they did here. So I like it, but because it's off the heels of something that I love that just came out not even 4 years ago. I'm not that crazy about it.
From a narrative perspective, I think you're absolutely right. I think Halloween definitely handles it better, but to the mental health perspective, it encourages and is kind of like a cautionary tale to like work through the trauma that you're actually going through. And again, we did a great episode about this a couple years ago with Heather Leach, who's an LPC out in Winchester, and called Trauma and Therapy. Highly recommend it. I'll put it in the link below. But yeah, I think that this film handles trauma in a really interesting way. And granted, yes, there are other movies that do it better, but I think this movie has some interesting things to kind of talk about as far as like processing long-term trauma, but also at the same time processing recent trauma.
Yeah, agreed. Can I ask you a question, because I think you said you watched this twice, right, since it came out? Like a continuity question, because I might have missed it in the opening newsreels. Did they mention like what happens in the immediate aftermath of the first movie? Like, why did Leatherface immediately go to an orphanage? Like, what happened to his entire family? He had a pretty big family at the end of the first movie.
So they don't actually address it, but so to answer your question, the film does not actually explore this. David Blue-Garcia, who's the director, actually talked about this.
So this is the stupidest thing I've ever said, but this is so derivative of Halloween. They got another David with the colored last name. We went from David Green to David Blue. They were like, let's just keep it as close to Halloween as we can. I'm just
a little bit.
It's the dumbest thing I've ever said, but it made me laugh. Go
on. So it's actually how do you say the guy's name? Is it fede-alvraez?
I always said Fede, but I've only read it, so I might be wrong.
Okay. So he sat down with the Boo Crew podcast on the Bloody Disgusting Network to talk about just kind of what they have been going on. He says, quote, "You see a picture of a young Leatherface and a picture and an old picture from the 1970s. The logic for me is that Leatherface, after the crimes of the original movie, just ran away. His new mother figure took pity on him, saw that he was a mentally challenged and scared, and probably did some terrible things." Alvarez continues, "She took him on under her wing. Probably, I think a lot of movies that have happened after the original still happened. He probably escaped, he was in and out of that place for a long time. And I think she probably gave him enough chances as movies that happened."
That's
and
insane. Sorry, go on.
Then it got to a point that he settled down. He just stayed there. It's not his real mother. Alvarez explains that his new mother figure in Leatherface's life, played by Alice Creech. I don't think she likes the Sawyers. I I don't think she's like the Sawyers. I think that she's just a really good lady. She hasn't been doing anything bad, anything wrong. She just doesn't want him to kill. And with that in mind, I think that is fascinating because that statement almost kind of makes me interpret the film a little bit differently. I don't know about you, but like the fact that like he ran away, but then like could have also like run away to like be a part of like at least the original 4 films, like just kind of makes me see that very differently.
Yeah, that's sorry, like that's really blew my mind when you were reading that, because I was expecting the first half where like him running away at the end of the first movie and then living in the orphanage. I was like, all right, and then he stayed there for the rest of his life. But I'm finding it a little hard to believe he would just periodically escape and then go do a Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and like then the family's not asking questions. It's a little far fetched for me. But it's crazy. But it's interesting they didn't really put any of that in the movie, but it leaves a door open for a crazy amount of sequel setup.
So let me chime in on that because I have seen all of these movies for better or for worse.
Yeah.
And they definitely get worse. Let me just tell you that. Let me just throw that out there. We thought Halloween had a messy timeline.
I know. I can't do it, man. I appreciate you did it, but I just don't care. I can't watch 3 or 4. I just really don't want to.
So it's interesting because like the original timeline is 1 through 4, but when you look at the second film is all right. So looking at Leatherface of the first film, Leatherface is he's kind of like a victim of bullying, and he's almost kind of bullied into these vile acts. And there are several sequences that kind of I feel like support my theory of that. And then you get into the second film and he's kind of like the second through the fourth film, he's kind of just like comically a henchman. And he kind of stays that way for the majority of these movies. And one of the things that I feel like makes this incredibly better is the fact that like it's a brutal Leatherface. We haven't seen this since Michael Bay took this property and reinvented it back in the early 2000s. But he also at the same time, and I don't know how you feel about this, he doesn't feel like the same exact Leatherface from 1974.
Yeah, he's smarter in his calculations here. He sets up traps and stuff. Like he was a little bit more animalistic and like, I think it's implied, I think, that he's a little bit like, mentally slow compared to his brothers and sisters, or not sisters, but his brothers. And so yeah, in this one, he's pretty calculating it a couple times. He sets traps. He can kind of figure stuff out,
Well, he's so smart in this. I feel like I don't want to say like he's like Einstein, but like he's smarter than how we interpreted him in 2004. To me, he feels like a sequel to Michael Bay's produced version of him.
I could see that, yeah.
Just because like he has like such a brutality and like, I mean. Let me pull up
the love of the because the Michael Bay version kind of played up the family a little bit more, and he had a mother figure, and like I could see that character then latching onto a different mother figure of the orphanage as opposed to the original Leatherface. So I kind of this does actually kind of feel like a little bit more of a sequel to that, and it was brutal just like that one was, whereas the original it's more just like uneasy and less visibly brutal.
Yeah, so Mark Burnham plays Leatherface in this particular iteration, and I think honestly he's the best one we've had since the 2003 version.
Yeah.
But of course no one beats Gunnar Hansen.
Yeah, no, Gunnar Hansen's the rage. He's so good. I just want to say real quick, so I do think this is an overall better movie than Texas Chainsaw 3D from 2013, but because of the Sally stuff that I don't think works, I actually kind of think that's a better legacy sequel or requel, if we're going to use that term. Only because we did get a last appearance of Gunnar Hansen. It did tie the original in more. I mean, it was far-fetched as all hell, like the fact that there was more family members, there was a baby that we never knew about. but at least it tied the legacy characters into the new characters. So I think in terms of requels, I think 2013 did it better, but this I think is a better movie, like beginning to end. And I would rather watch this one, I think.
Yeah, I think that when this movie really works, it really works. And I think that you have that working because of, again, its brutality, and it's like it's a traditional slasher. And I feel like we don't really get a whole lot of those nowadays. Like I feel like everything, if you're going to be a slasher, it's got to be something to the level of Halloween 2018 or Scream 5. And I'm just like, I just want something that like I can just turn on and just be entertained for 80 to 90 minutes.
Exactly. Oh, I have a question too, since you've seen all of them. Was this the first movie that had a Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Because the bus was a massacre, and I feel like we've never actually had, if we're gonna look up the term massacre, he usually kills one or two people, maybe three with a chainsaw. This one had a massacre. Has that ever been done before in these?
No, this is the the first one.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I love it.
Really. Yeah, no, let's get into like some of the gags in this one, because I think we talked about it with the cops, but I mean this movie, like once it gets into I guess before that, how did you feel about the fact that like his chainsaw was hidden in the mother's room behind the concrete wall?
I liked it. I thought it was pretty funny. I was wondering why the mom was like, just don't go in my room. And like, I don't know. It seemed like it's, in the if you're willing to buy the storyline that she's been taking care of him all these years, I get it. Like she doesn't want him to do bad things, so she hides it in her room. But I also think it negates the fact that he escapes once every 4 movies and has a massacre, and then comes back and puts the chainsaw back in his room.
Yeah, no, I don't like that whole notion that they're just like trying to like weave in some of like the other like legacy sequels. I'm just like, no, man, just like just admit the fact that it's this one. It's 1974, 2022. Like those are the only two stories in this timeline. But yeah, no, it is really interesting because I think it does kind of support his idea of like, here you have a kid that like truly did bad things, and he's kind of like lamenting for his guilt. And I think that you see that originally in 74, but I think that the death of his mother kind of like this like redemption factor for him kind of like reverts him back to that animalistic callback.
Yeah, it's kind of a nurture versus nature thing. It's like as long as he had this like mother figure to take care of him, he didn't kill people. And if this is a legacy sequel, then for 50 years he's been able to quell his cannibalistic crazy urges because he has had someone loving in his life. The second he lost that, he went right back to it. So yeah, it's kind of just like, it's kind of saying nature could help you get over, nurture could help you get over your nature. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Just kind of like harping from like a mental health perspective on that real quick. I think that proves that like love and like being kind to someone really does go a long way.
Yeah.
I don't think that anyone is too far gone. I think that, we all make mistakes, and we're all gonna and not be the greatest human beings, but also at the same time that like, we can turn our lives around and be better people at the same time. And I think you in a way you kind of get that with the Leatherface character. But again, once you take away that source of nurture, like you were saying, like it kind of like anger and the grief kind of mixed together to create this massacre figure.
Yeah. It was cool. I'm just kind of running through my notes here. I feel like the last little bit here, the thing that I didn't say comparing it to the first one, where I didn't really realize this until I rewatched it because it's been a while. I like that it still explores there's a little theme in the original of kind of new age versus old age, where the group of teens coming in are dressed like very hip for the 70s. They're like not, they're not dressed or act conservatively at all. The one character has like an astrology book, so she's into kind of like new age thinking. And then they go up against this real old world where they slaughter animals and they have farms and everything's kind of old school. So I always kind of considered the original kind of had that kind of old world versus new world vibes. And then I like that they carried that over to this one where, right before the Chainsaw Massacre, they're trying to cancel him, by internet standards, when he's just like, dude, I'm old school. Like I hit cows with hammers. Like, I don't know what you guys are even talking about. So not subtle in any way, but I kind of like that they still kept that same little theme, which made it feel like a sequel as opposed to just like ignoring anything connected.
Yeah, I love that that you brought in the I hit cows with hammers thing, because I just remember that scene from the original where Franklin's just talking about the how they kill things now, and he's just like, oh, they got this like retractable thing that you just stick right in the head of the sheep and it just goes.
Yep. And then
yeah, that was something
and Leatherface's brother immediately after that goes, oh, that's the new way. I don't like that way. It puts people out of work. You got to do it the old way. And so it's like it's already like they're combating kind of the way the world's changing, new technologies. And, they're like, for lack of a better word, in this new one, gentrifying this town. They want to bring in all these fancy influencers, or maybe not influencers, but trendy people to then like make it the new hotspot, make it the new Williamsburg, to use a New York reference where I'm from.
I didn't actually even consider that about either one of those movies. I think that's a really valid and really cool insight. And it kind of makes me see both of those movies a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Wow. You want to jump into this insane third act before we kind of wind things down?
Let's do it.
So Leatherface essentially gets the chainsaw, and I gotta say, like, before we get into like the third act, like, what was your favorite kill in this movie?
I might I think about it a little bit and maybe you'll remember a better one, but I think it's that one I brought up earlier when he breaks the cop's wrist bone and then stabs him with the wrist bone. I've seen a lot of gags and a lot of horror movies, and that's new to me. I haven't seen that one yet, so I gotta think about it. Maybe there's a different one, but that one, right, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, that one's high on my list. I would say probably for me it is just the staging, at least, of the very first bus kill, where the guy pulls out his so he enters into the bus, everyone looks at him, and then just immediately pulls out their phones, jumps on live, and he's like, do anything and we'll cancel you. And that line was like the trailer line that everyone clung to, and I was just like, that's kind of dumb, but okay.
See, that's why I'm glad I didn't watch trailers, because if I saw that line 3-4 times, I'd be like, this is stupid. But because I didn't see a trailer, it made me giggle. I was like, this is moron. All right, I'm ready for this guy to die. This is hilarious.
So I didn't actually watch a trailer. I just know that like everyone like shared that specific image with that trailer line.
Got it.
And but like, no, I really liked the way that they staged that, to where you have like, you're getting to kind of see it through like also like through the live, but also through like IRL as well. I just thought that it was shot really well.
Yeah, it was a cool. It was really interesting, and it was funny too. Like, I liked when you see all the comments on the live video, or people like, this looks fake, and it reminds me, sometimes you watch something on TikTok or like whatever, and someone like falls and hurts themselves real bad, and then you go to the comments and half of them are like, staged, wasn't real. Like, it's all you ever see on the internet is just people being skeptical. So I found that kind of funny, where it kind of brought me back to a Halloween Resurrection vibe. Good old days of 2002, watching kills over the internet.
Games Entertainments.
Yeah, that's it.
There's a sequel.
Oh, go on.
Real quick, I was just gonna say that there's actually a movie on Shudder that's also a under 90 minutes. It's called Shook. It was one of my favorites from last year, and it's got like a Scream-esque slasher vibe to it, but the last act of that movie is like people dying on lives, and they're like, oh no, this is fake, this can't be real, like what am I seeing right now? And it's just like, dude, like, are we that desensitized to violence that we don't even know like when it's like real and not anymore?
Yeah, And just in content, like we're so used to everyone performing constantly, so we're like, is this someone just doing this for the sake of getting a bunch of views, or are they actually hurt? It's this movie doesn't really tackle any of that. It's really just this one little moment, but it made me giggle. But yeah, I like the bus
Yeah,
gags. The whole third act I kind of liked. And the two sisters together, I just thought they were pretty good. Tell me if you agree, but I think Melody looks like she could easily play Alana Glazer's sister from Broad City. She looked just like Alana
yes,
Glazer. And then you could also throw in
yes.
I hate that I can't remember her name, but maybe from Arrested Development, and she's on Search Party.
Oh,
But I feel
okay.
like
Yeah,
if
I
the
know what you're
three of
talking
them played
about.
sisters in a movie, I'd be on board.
Yeah. Yeah, the third act is like it's so hard to pick one because like I also think that like Sally's death is like when he like raises her up in the rain and like the chainsaw slowly just brings her body closer to the like the end of the blade. Like I was just like, dang,
Yeah, that was cool
brutal,
imagery.
great.
That kind of reminded me of a little bit of the 2013 Evil Dead like third act feel. Like, it just had a
Yeah.
lot of the rain and all that moment. So I like that, but could not buy that she then had enough strength to do anything after that. You can't take a moving chainsaw through the middle of your stomach where your heart is for like 20 seconds and then still be able to be like, Papa, save the day, and give some like advice and shit. It was ridiculous.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah, at that point, when like when I watched it the first time and I was like, what a waste of a legacy character. Like
The same
they
thing.
just
I was like, she
nailed
showed
it
up
in
to
the
die.
coffin.
I was like,
Yeah. And then like that's your plan for this this legacy character. And then she like shoots him, and I'm just like, I guess logic has just been thrown out the window at this point.
yeah, you can't have both. You can't have that iconic like her hanging off the end of the chainsaw and then she still survives. You gotta trim down the injury. I couldn't. By then I was like, all right, whatever.
Like commit to like one or the other. Like you brought up Halloween Resurrection earlier, and like the way that they like counteract the end of like Laurie chopping off of Michael Myers' head
Yeah,
just to bring him back, and I'm like, what? Like,
yeah.
come on,
That
man.
like annoys me as like a fan. I'm like, listen, you got to commit to your choices. If you're gonna kill, you got to kill. If you're not, you can't do both.
Exactly. And it doesn't take that long. Like, it's just like, all right, it was cool to see this character, but like, this is clearly a story about Lila and Melody. So, like, let's just commit to them versus Leatherface and we'll be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But speaking of callbacks, that last kill of the movie,
Oh yeah,
perfect.
I did not. I was wondering why the movie spent like 3 to 4 frames at different points showing that their car had autopilot. Because I was like, what do they do? Like, why do they keep telling me they have an autopilot car? And again, I was already thinking of the new age versus old age theme, but it was still like, I'm like, again with the autopilot, and then to just have it taking away Lila while her sister gets her head chopped off while she's screaming. I was like, all right, I see. Good setup. I was into it.
I really wish I could remember the name of this user, but there's a letterbox review that just says me at the beginning of the movie. Why are they driving a Tesla? Me at the end of the movie. Good payoff.
Yep, exactly.
And him just dancing with
him
dancing with
right
it
back into his dance.
great callback.
Yeah. And you
Um,
want to talk about the post credits that you told me that was there because I would not have gone and looked. It's brief, but it's
yeah,
there.
yeah. It's basically it's just Leatherface coming back to the 1974 house, and I was I'm kind of curious if that's like just like a fan service or if that's actually like a setup for what is going to be the next film.
Well, yeah, now that I realize that they didn't explain what happened to the original family, I assume it's sequel setup. If they were to make a sequel, that he would then go home. Who knows? Maybe Chop Top's still alive. Like there's gonna be someone, like there's gonna be some members of his family still there, and I feel like that's what it was kind of showing. Was like we're gonna see him go home, and but people will be there, not just home and like to an empty house. Maybe even the grandpa. Who knows? Maybe he's still in cobwebs, just waiting for someone to put a finger to his mouth. That creepy grandpa. He better be there. I mean, he
Yo,
doesn't need to move, but the skeleton better be there. I want that grandpa in a wheelchair.
have you ever seen the before and after of that actor? Like in that time,
I
like
have, yeah.
it's
It's
dude,
crazy.
like I've read bits and pieces of Chainsaw Confidential, and my plan for this year is to finish it. But like just kind of hearing their like how poor they were on this movie, like they did a great job for that particular design.
It's incredible, yeah. That's what I mean when I say the movie's unsettling, is I mainly mean the last 30 minutes. It just really just upsets me. Like, as someone who loves horror and I can stomach it all day, and I get so much like fun out of it. I get Texas Chainsaw Original is so good. I don't get any fun out of it. I just get upset and like,
Yeah.
that's that, and that's a compliment. I'm saying that's why I think it's better than a lot of other slasher movies.
Yeah, like if I'm gonna like watch like a fun Texas Chainsaw, it's got to be either two or it has to be um heart. It has to be two, Next Generation or 3D. I think
Yeah,
those three are like
correct me if I'm
among
wrong.
my favorite. Yeah,
In 3D, he uses his chainsaw to take out the legs of a Ferris wheel that then rolls onto like a carnival full of people, right?
Mm,
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, like that. That's
yeah,
fun. Like that doesn't unsettle me. I don't. I'm not, that's just a good time at the movies.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like I feel like you need within these horror franchises, like you need the fun ones. Like I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he was like telling me about how Halloween is like one of his comfort films.
Yeah,
And I was like, I can't see that because that movie, like, as much as I've seen it, like, I have to be in the right mindset because it is a heavy film in my opinion.
yeah.
But like, if I'm gonna watch something fun, like, I'm gonna go for like Halloween 6 or H2O or Halloween 3.
Exactly. Yeah. Or like a lot of the Nightmare on Elm Streets are that for me. Even the ones I
Mm-hmm.
love, they're not like scary to the core. They're just inventive and really creative filmmaking and just all the stuff I love, like from a production standpoint and Robert Englund's performance. So yeah, there's a difference, and this falls into that. I think this is a pretty fun movie. I think if people I know who are like into slashers but don't really follow them, I'm gonna be like, pop in 22. It'll be a good time.
What? All right. So my last two questions before we end the podcast is this a movie that you feel like is made for horror fans, or is it not for the general population?
I definitely think it's more for horror fans. I don't think it has enough. I think most regular people need something to lure them in, like a Jamie Lee Curtis star, or even just. I don't think Texas Chainsaw really has that kind of legacy to most regular people. To horror fans, we revere it. So I kind of think this is going to be strictly for the horror fans, and especially because it subverts some slasher tropes. You have to be familiar with those tropes. So if you're not already kind of in love with slashers, you won't really get what this movie is sidestepping a couple times. So I kind of, this one would be hard for me to recommend. Like, I always give it the Masha test. Masha is my fiance and co-host of Love What I Love for anyone listening. And she does not like horror movies at all, but there are certain ones where I'll show it to her and I'll be like, you have to see this one. Like, I showed her Hereditary and she couldn't stop thinking about it. It blew her mind. I've showed her Halloween 2018. She really liked it. I don't think I'm going to have her sit down and watch this. I consider it a waste of a horror movie because it's hard to get her to watch them. So I think I'm only going to recommend this one to slasher fans.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that this movie is made for the slasher fans, very much the same way that Halloween Kills was made for slasher fans.
Yeah. Halloween 2018, I think everyone can like Halloween Kills. You gotta be in the culture, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So my last question is, if you got to write a sequel to this movie, where would you take it?
I mean, kind of. I think just the logical route that I was saying before, that I think that little post credits adds up, where I think Leatherface does go home. Some of the family members still are there. It'll allow them to do more of the legacy connections. That tends to be the route where the next sequel after a legacy sequel is like, let's do more. So first we bring back Laurie, then we're bringing back Tommy, Lindsay, this and that. So if they're going to do the trend of copying Halloween, I kind of think that's the route they're going to go. I don't really know what Elsie Fisher's character will do, or what they could do with her. My gut feeling is that they're probably not going to get her for another sequel. I think, even though she hasn't done a lot of movies, I still think she has some star power. So unless she is actually passionate about it, I feel like she might walk away, a lot what a lot of stars do in these movies, and then they're going to have a new gang of protagonists somehow messing with Texas.
I agree with that. I think that if you're going to bring back anyone, I think you bring back Chop Top. I think Bill
It'd be hard to
Moseley.
believe that Drayton Sawyer's still alive, the older brother, but like, if you can, why not? Sure.
I mean, he's such a beloved character that, there is if anyone can find it, DM me the link. There's supposedly a made movie that never made its way, but it was Chop Top spinoff movie.
Really?
With Moseley. It came out in the late 90s, and it's like Chop Top versus the United States or something along those lines.
That I've never heard of. If you get the link, forward me one too. Anyone listen?
I got you, man. Like him and Leatherface is like just their chemistry in the second film, I feel like, is just so solid that I would be absolutely enthralled with a potential like team up sequel. Like, it's like, oh, these people hurt my brother, revenge time. So it's just kind of continuing that brutality from this one.
Yeah.
I would love a dark version of Chop Top. So
yeah, I think he's the only other character like that really has the staying power to come back and mean anything. I mean, I haven't even seen 3 or 4, but I felt like if there was a Chop Top-esque character that stood out in those, I might have heard about him by now. I kind of just felt like that didn't happen after 2. So it's like 1 introduces Drayton outside of Leatherface, obviously, but outside of Leatherface, you get the older brother. He comes back in the second one. He's still great. You get Chop Top in 2. After that, I don't really even know what kind of legacy you could bring back, at least from the originals. I could be wrong again. Haven't seen 3 or 4.
Yeah, I would love. Oh, yeah. I would absolutely love to see them kind of bring back him. I think that you're right. Like, he's like the only true antagonist or like family member that we've seen that has any staying power.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, if Dennis Hopper was still alive, I'd like him to come back. But
same. I will spoil it for those of you guys that haven't seen it. It's a mild spoiler, but the 4th film, the Illuminati gets involved in it, and it's weird. Right. I'll just leave it at that. So you can't do anything.
Should I watch it? Like, I don't know. It just always seemed like, yeah.
Please watch it.
all right. Because I do love balls to the wall insanity. So it's like, I don't know what it is. This is like, and I love my dumb franchises. We've gone on and on. I've seen so many entries to franchises that I think are bad. I don't know why Texas Chainsaw never hit me like that, where I was like, I'm gonna watch them all. It's never felt that way, but I'll watch 4.
It's streaming on HBO. It's so much dumb, but it has so much charm to it, and I think Matthew McConaughey just really makes it. Be prepared for this one to be like just like absolutely asinine, completely stupid, and have a lack of Leatherface.
All right.
All I can say.
It has robot legs though, I think, or hydraulic legs.
Yes.
Or something. All right, fair enough.
If
you're gonna cut up my Leatherface, give me some robo legs. It's fair trade.
It's so weird. So like, you do end up like getting like a lack of Leatherface, but like Matthew McConaughey's like energy in that movie more than like makes up for it.
Oh, I love it. And I love how they did the classic thing where after the stardom of Zellweger and McConaughey, they redid the poster and put them on the cover because they were, because it's kind of like putting Aniston on the cover of Leprechaun. Like she was never there to begin with. She's not the biggest character, but after Friends, that's how you sell the DVD. So I always found that funny that every time I see it, it's Zellweger and McConaughey side by side. But I don't think that was the original promotional art.
No, and I have like the VHS of the original cut for it, and I love the poster artwork for it. It's just it's like a close up on like a pair of like feminine lips, and then instead of like having like the like lipstick doing it, it's like a chainsaw,
right? A little tiny
yeah.
Yeah, that
it's so good.
Video store memories of me walking through the horror section and being scared and being like, I don't want to rent any of this.
It's worth it. So, all right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us on this episode of Victims and Villains. Where can people find Love What I Love?
You all can find Love What I Love in all the wonderful places where podcasts live: Apple, Spotify, Podcast Addict, which is what I use because I'm weird. You can also find us on social media at LWIL Podcast. That's for Instagram, and then just search Love What I Love on Facebook. It's where we post our fun every week, or every episode. We do a Photoshop, and Masha, who does the Photoshops, gets better and better every time. So I've gone from giggling at them to being genuinely impressed. So check them out. We come out every other Monday wherever podcasts are found.
They do a great job. And then if you guys are like cinephiles like Andy and myself, they have also done franchise deep dives on Fast and Furious, Child's Play, and Halloween, correct?
Yeah, those are the three. I'd like to do more, but they are daunting to do. So I gotta pick a shorter one. I'm thinking maybe Scream. That's a nice $5, excluding the show. So we'll see. We'll see what happens on the next one. I might do something small. I just watched all the Ip Man movies for the first time. I've seen the first one. I never saw the sequels.
Ooh.
There's 4 of those, so I feel like that's an easy deep dive I can do.
Oh, Ip Man. It's a great franchise.
Yeah, we have an episode on the first one coming out in a few weeks.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, you guys can find me. I'm at Captain Nostalgia on Letterboxd. You guys can also follow our parent company, Victims and Villains, at victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can get links to our social medias, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, wherever you guys get your podcasts from, Patreon, and more podcasts like this, movie reviews, and most importantly, our mental health resource library, all of which you guys can find in the show notes below, along with links to Love What I Love. Have a good night, guys.